I've always felt very strongly about it, and I've been watching very carefully what others have been doing.
A political storm was already brewing inside the kingdom, but nobody expected it to erupt this quickly. Just hours after a confidential financial review reached senior officials, rumors began spreading that a powerful royal figure had uncovered information capable of changing the future of the monarchy itself. Yet the most shocking part was not the discovery. The most shocking part was the identity of the person who allegedly possessed it. For weeks, palace observers had sensed that something unusual was unfolding behind the scenes. Public appearances continued as normal, official statements remained carefully controlled, and senior members of the royal household appeared determined to project stability. Yet according to growing speculation within the kingdom, a private investigation involving sensitive financial records had quietly expanded into something much larger than anyone originally anticipated. The investigation reportedly began as a routine review designed to improve transparency across several royal institutions. Such reviews were not uncommon. Every major organization periodically examined procedures, budgets, and operational systems to ensure everything functioned efficiently. However, according to sources familiar with the matter, investigators soon encountered inconsistencies that raised questions no one had expected to confront. What exactly had they discovered? And why were senior palace advisors suddenly treating an ordinary review as a matter of national significance? Those questions rapidly spread through political circles, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty that only intensified with every passing day. According to several commentators, the situation became even more intriguing when the future king reportedly requested additional information rather than accepting preliminary conclusions. Instead of relying solely on summaries prepared by advisors, the future monarch allegedly demanded a deeper examination of the records involved. That decision immediately transformed a routine review into a major operation involving analysts, legal experts, and senior officials. Why would a future king personally involve himself in such a matter? Was there something hidden beneath the surface? Or was the investigation uncovering information capable of affecting the monarchy's future direction? As speculation intensified, attention shifted toward another development occurring simultaneously. Several influential figures connected to powerful institutions throughout the kingdom reportedly began monitoring events with increasing concern. While none publicly commented, observers noted that the growing silence itself seemed unusual. Whenever powerful people stop speaking, curiosity often increases. And curiosity was now spreading rapidly. Some commentators argued that the issue involved far more than finances. Others believed the real story concerned influence, authority, and control. A few even suggested that the investigation could eventually expose long-standing arrangements that had never previously attracted public attention. Whatever the truth might be, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The situation was evolving, and each new development seemed to create even larger questions. Could the investigation reshape relationships within the royal household? Could it alter future leadership decisions? Or could the entire controversy ultimately reveal something completely unexpected? At that moment, nobody seemed to know. What they did know was that the future king had reportedly received information serious enough to justify continued scrutiny, and that alone was enough to keep the kingdom talking. Before we uncover the next chapter, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next part explores the mysterious discovery that reportedly changed the investigation's direction and why several palace insiders believe the biggest revelation had not yet emerged. The atmosphere surrounding the investigation changed dramatically the moment the future king received a second confidential briefing. Until that point, senior advisors had viewed the review as a sensitive administrative matter requiring discretion and patience. However, according to individuals familiar with the fictional events unfolding inside the kingdom, the newly uncovered information suggested that the original concerns represented only a small fraction of a much larger puzzle. What began as a routine examination of records was now evolving into a mystery that appeared capable of reaching far beyond finances and into the very structure of influence surrounding the royal household. As analysts continued examining archived documents, transaction histories, and internal communications, an unusual pattern allegedly began emerging. Individual discoveries appeared insignificant when viewed separately, yet when investigators assembled the pieces together, a far more troubling picture started taking shape. The future king reportedly learned that several unrelated developments occurring across different institutions shared unexpected connections. The question, suddenly confronting investigators, was no longer whether irregularities existed. The question was whether those irregularities were part of a coordinated effort that had remained invisible for years. That realization immediately raised another mystery. If these connections truly existed, who understood the full picture? And more importantly, who stood to benefit from keeping that picture hidden? According to fictional palace commentators, those questions triggered a wave of concern among senior officials who had previously believed the investigation would conclude quietly. Instead, every answer seemed to generate two additional questions. Every document pointed toward another document. Every discovery appeared connected to an even larger discovery waiting just beyond reach. The future king reportedly refused to rush toward conclusions. Rather than making public statements or authorizing dramatic actions, the future monarch allegedly ordered investigators to continue gathering evidence. That decision proved critical because the next phase of the inquiry reportedly uncovered something nobody had anticipated. Investigators allegedly discovered references to meetings, communications, and strategic discussions that appeared to link several influential figures operating far outside traditional royal circles. Why would external figures become connected to a matter that seemed entirely internal? And why did those connections only become visible after investigators expanded their search? Those questions quickly became the focus of attention. According to sources within the fictional narrative, analysts began constructing detailed timelines designed to determine exactly when key events occurred and how they related to one another. The results reportedly surprised everyone involved. Events previously believed to be isolated now appeared interconnected. Decisions made months apart seemed linked through common participants. Information that once appeared meaningless suddenly acquired new significance when viewed within the broader timeline. The deeper investigators looked, the more complicated the situation became. Yet perhaps the most intriguing development involved a collection of communications discovered during the review process. While none of the messages provided definitive answers, several apparently hinted at the existence of plans extending much further into the future than anyone had originally imagined. Instead of focusing on immediate objectives, these discussions allegedly revolved around influence, positioning, and long-term strategic advantages. That revelation transformed the investigation, because whenever long-term planning enters a story, the stakes immediately increase. A short-term problem can often be corrected. A long-term strategy can reshape entire institutions. Could the investigators be looking at something much larger than a simple administrative issue? Could the future king be confronting a challenge capable of affecting the monarchy's direction for years to come? Or were analysts connecting dots that merely appeared related? At that stage, nobody possessed complete certainty. Nevertheless, concern continued growing. As the investigation expanded, another surprising detail reportedly emerged. Several individuals who had previously shown little interest in palace affairs suddenly became unusually attentive to developments. Observers noticed increased communication between influential circles, unusual requests for information, and growing curiosity regarding the future king's next move. While none of those actions proved wrongdoing, the timing itself attracted attention. Why were so many people suddenly interested? What exactly were they worried about? And how much did they already know? The future king reportedly recognized that public speculation was beginning to accelerate. Yet instead of responding immediately, the future monarch allegedly chose patience over publicity. According to advisors, revealing incomplete information could jeopardize the entire investigation. Therefore, investigators continued working behind the scenes while rumors spread throughout political, financial, and social circles. Ironically, the silence may have intensified curiosity even further. When officials speak constantly, audiences often lose interest. When officials remain silent during a growing controversy, audiences assume something significant is unfolding. That dynamic reportedly fueled unprecedented levels of speculation across the kingdom. Then came what many fictional commentators described as the first true breakthrough. After weeks of analysis, investigators allegedly identified a previously overlooked connection that suddenly tied multiple strands of the investigation together. For the first time, the scattered pieces began forming a coherent narrative. The future king reportedly received an updated report summarizing the discovery, and according to those familiar with the matter, the contents of that report immediately elevated the situation from concerning to potentially historic. Yet the report also introduced an alarming possibility. If the new findings proved accurate, the individuals involved may have been operating with far greater sophistication than anyone previously suspected. That possibility raised an unavoidable question. Were investigators finally approaching the truth, or were they only beginning to uncover the first layer of a much deeper secret? The answer remained hidden. However, one thing became increasingly clear. The investigation was no longer simply about records, documents, or administrative concerns. The investigation had evolved into a search for the individuals, motivations, and strategies operating behind the scenes. And according to growing speculation, the next discovery would not merely explain what happened. The next discovery might finally reveal why it happened. Before we continue into the next chapter, make sure to subscribe, follow the story, and stay tuned, because the next section explores the breakthrough report that reportedly changed everything, the mysterious figure who unexpectedly entered the investigation, and the revelation that may finally expose the hidden agenda investigators have been chasing from the very beginning. The breakthrough report was supposed to provide clarity. Instead, according to fictional palace sources, the report created an entirely new crisis. Senior advisors who expected answers reportedly found themselves confronted by an even more troubling possibility. The investigation had finally connected multiple strands of evidence into a single narrative, yet the resulting picture was far more complicated than anyone anticipated. Rather than identifying a single problem, investigators allegedly discovered an interconnected network of decisions, relationships, and strategic maneuvers stretching across multiple institutions. What made the discovery so alarming was not the existence of the connections themselves. Powerful organizations naturally develop complex relationships over time. The concern stemmed from the realization that very few people appear to understand the entire structure. According to fictional accounts, most participants only understood small portions of a much larger system. As investigators continued piecing together information, a troubling question emerged. If no individual possessed complete visibility, who was coordinating the broader strategy? That question immediately changed the direction of the investigation. Until this point, analysts had focused primarily on documents, records, and timelines. Now attention shifted toward people. Investigators reportedly began examining communication patterns, decision-making processes, and the movement of information between influential circles. The objective was no longer simply discovering what happened. The objective had become identifying who benefited from each development and why certain events appeared to unfold with remarkable precision. As those efforts intensified, another surprising discovery allegedly emerged. Several seemingly unrelated events that had occurred months earlier suddenly gained new significance when viewed through the lens of the investigation. Decisions once dismissed as routine now appeared strategically timed. Meetings previously considered insignificant suddenly looked important. Conversations that attracted little attention at the time now appeared connected to developments occurring much later. Could these links simply be coincidence? Or were investigators finally beginning to uncover the hidden logic behind the entire operation? According to fictional commentators following the story, that uncertainty generated enormous tension inside the palace. Every new connection increased confidence that investigators were approaching the truth. Yet every new connection also revealed additional layers that still required explanation. Then came another unexpected twist. According to sources familiar with the fictional narrative, investigators reportedly identified a previously overlooked individual whose role had remained almost entirely invisible throughout the earlier stages of the inquiry. Unlike high-profile figures accustomed to public attention, this individual operated quietly in the background, rarely attracting scrutiny. Yet according to the report, several critical developments appeared linked through this person. That revelation stunned analysts. Why had this individual escaped attention for so long? And what role did this person actually play? The future king reportedly requested immediate clarification. According to advisors, the future monarch recognized that identifying key participants could determine whether the investigation moved toward resolution or became trapped within endless speculation. Therefore, investigators allegedly redirected substantial resources toward understanding this newly discovered connection. What they reportedly found only deepened the mystery. Instead of uncovering straightforward answers, analysts allegedly encountered a series of relationships extending into areas nobody expected the investigation to reach. Financial matters connected to strategic discussions. Strategic discussions connected to advisory networks. Advisory networks connected to decisions affecting multiple institutions. The deeper investigators looked, the more interconnected everything appeared. At this stage, observers began noticing a pattern. Every breakthrough seemed to reveal another hidden layer. Every answer generated larger questions. Every conclusion opened another avenue of inquiry. The investigation was behaving less like a traditional review and more like a maze. And somewhere within that maze, according to fictional speculation, investigators believe the central truth remained hidden. Then another development shifted attention once again. Several senior advisors reportedly began expressing concern about timing. According to palace observers, the investigation was approaching a critical stage at precisely the same moment that major institutional decisions were being discussed. That coincidence created an uncomfortable possibility. What if the issues under investigation were not merely historical? What if certain developments were continuing to influence events in real time? That possibility transformed the stakes completely. A historical problem can be studied calmly. An active problem demands immediate attention. The distinction mattered enormously because it affected every recommendation being prepared for the future king. Would patience remain the best strategy? Or was decisive action becoming necessary? Those questions reportedly dominated internal discussions. Interestingly, public speculation intensified, even though very little official information emerged. Political commentators, journalists, and observers throughout the kingdom began constructing theories designed to explain the growing mystery. Some theories focused on influence. Others focused on institutional power. A few focused on long-term strategic planning. Yet none of the theories fully explained all available information. And that uncertainty created a powerful sense of anticipation. People knew something important was happening. Nobody knew exactly what. Then came what fictional commentators later described as the turning point. Investigators allegedly discovered a sequence of events that finally revealed motive. For weeks, analysts have focused on actions. Now they reportedly understood purpose. According to the report, decisions that previously appeared random suddenly aligned around a common objective. The scattered pieces finally began forming a recognizable pattern. The implications were enormous, because understanding motive changes everything. Actions can be misunderstood. Timing can be misinterpreted. Documents can be incomplete. Motive provides context. Motive explains direction. Motive transforms isolated events into a coherent story. Yet even this breakthrough contained a complication. The newly identified motive allegedly pointed toward another figure whose involvement had never previously been considered. Once again, investigators found themselves standing at the edge of a larger mystery than the one they had just solved. How many people were actually involved? How far did the influence extend? And what would happen once the future king received the complete report? According to fictional palace sources, those questions now dominated every conversation surrounding the investigation. The future king reportedly understood that the next decision could shape the monarchy's future for years to come. Moving too quickly risked mistakes. Moving too slowly risked allowing the situation to grow even more complicated. Finding the correct balance would require patience, judgment, and complete understanding of facts that remained frustratingly incomplete. And just when investigators believed they were finally approaching the center of the mystery, another discovery allegedly emerged from an unexpected source. According to growing speculation, this new information not only confirmed parts of the investigation, but also introduced a revelation so surprising that several advisors reportedly questioned everything they thought they knew. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because the next chapter explores the shocking revelation that allegedly changed the future king's understanding of the entire investigation, the unexpected source who brought new information forward, and the decision that could determine the fate of everyone connected to the mystery. The revelation arriving from the unexpected source was not dramatic because of what it immediately proved. The revelation was dramatic because of what it forced investigators to reconsider. According to fictional palace sources, Weeks of analysis had been built upon a series of assumptions that appeared reasonable at the time. Yet the newly delivered information allegedly challenged several of those assumptions simultaneously. Suddenly, the investigation was no longer focused exclusively on uncovering hidden activities. The investigation was now attempting to determine whether the entire mystery had been viewed through the wrong lens from the very beginning. That possibility reportedly stunned everyone involved. For months, analysts had been connecting documents, tracing relationships, and constructing increasingly sophisticated theories. Every new discovery appeared to reinforce the existing narrative. Every connection seemed to point in the same direction. Yet according to fictional accounts, the newly surfaced evidence suggested that investigators may have mistaken consequences for causes. In other words, many of the events attracting attention might not have been the origin of the problem at all. They may have been symptoms of something much larger operating behind the scenes. And if that interpretation proved correct, an entirely new question emerged. What was the true origin? What event set everything into motion? According to fictional commentators following the story, that question quickly became the most important question in the kingdom. The future king reportedly ordered a complete reassessment of the timeline. Instead of focusing solely on recent developments, investigators allegedly began moving backward through years of records, decisions, communications, and institutional changes. The objective was simple in theory but extraordinarily difficult in practice. Analysts needed to identify the earliest point at which the pattern became visible. Only then could they determine whether the situation resulted from deliberate planning, unintended consequences, or something even more surprising. As the historical review progressed, another unexpected discovery reportedly emerged. Several events previously dismissed as insignificant suddenly appeared highly relevant. Decisions that once seemed routine now looked strategic. Conversations that once seemed unrelated now appeared connected. Individuals, who once occupied the margins of the investigation, suddenly moved toward the center. According to fictional palace observers, the reassessment transformed the investigation into something resembling an archaeological excavation, where every deeper layer revealed evidence of an even older layer beneath it. What made this process particularly fascinating was the growing realization that influence often operates differently than most people imagine. Popular stories usually portray influence as direct and obvious. A powerful figure makes a decision, and consequences follow. The fictional investigation, however, allegedly revealed something much more complex. Influence often moves indirectly. Small decisions create conditions. Conditions create opportunities. Opportunities shape future choices. Years later, the cumulative effect becomes visible, even though no single action appears decisive on its own. That realization reportedly forced investigators to abandon several earlier theories. And when investigators abandon theories, uncertainty increases. Could the investigation be approaching the truth? Or could investigators be moving further away from it? According to fictional sources, even senior advisors disagreed. Meanwhile, another development began attracting attention inside palace circles. The future king reportedly received a confidential assessment prepared by a group of independent analysts who had not participated in earlier stages of the investigation. Their purpose was not to confirm existing conclusions. Their purpose was to challenge them. Fresh perspectives often identify weaknesses that experienced investigators overlook, and according to reports, that is exactly what happened. The independent assessment allegedly highlighted several contradictions. Not major contradictions, not dramatic contradictions, but enough inconsistencies to raise important questions. If the established narrative was completely accurate, why did certain pieces of evidence refuse to fit neatly into place? Why did several timelines remain incomplete? Why did a handful of critical questions remain unanswered despite months of investigation? Those concerns reportedly triggered another wave of analysis, and with that wave came yet another surprise. Investigators allegedly discovered that two separate groups had been pursuing entirely different objectives while unknowingly influencing the same chain of events. Until that moment, analysts believed they were examining a single coordinated effort. The new theory suggested something far more complicated. Multiple actors pursuing different goals may have unintentionally created the appearance of a unified strategy. That possibility changed everything. Because coordinated actions imply control, unintended interactions imply chaos, and distinguishing between the two became the central challenge facing the investigation. Think about that for a moment. How often do people assume events are connected because the outcome appears connected? How often do separate actions become woven together after the fact into a story that feels coherent? According to fictional commentators, those questions transformed the investigation from a search for hidden actors into a search for hidden understanding. Yet just as investigators began adjusting their approach, another startling development reportedly emerged. A source previously believed to possess only limited information unexpectedly provided material that appeared capable of bridging multiple gaps in the timeline. According to fictional reports, this information did not answer every question. However, it allegedly established connections between several critical events that had remained isolated until that point. The effect was immediate. Analysts reportedly realized they were no longer looking at fragments. They were beginning to see the outline of the entire structure. For the first time since the investigation began, the broader picture appeared within reach. And that realization generated both excitement and concern. Excitement because answers seemed closer than ever. Concern because the emerging picture reportedly carried implications extending far beyond the original scope of the inquiry. If the new interpretation proved correct, the consequences could affect not only individuals but institutions. The investigation was no longer about identifying isolated actions. The investigation had become an examination of systems, incentives, relationships, and decisions that shaped the kingdom over many years. Could the monarchy emerge stronger after confronting these questions? Could transparency ultimately reinforce public trust? Or would the final revelations create challenges nobody had anticipated? Those questions remained unanswered. Yet according to fictional palace sources, the future king understood that the next stage would be the most difficult stage of all. Discovering information is one challenge. Deciding what to do with that information is another challenge entirely. And just when the investigation appeared closest to resolution, an emergency meeting reportedly brought together several of the kingdom's most influential figures. According to growing speculation, what happened during that meeting would determine whether the truth finally emerged or remained buried beneath layers of uncertainty forever. Before we continue into the final chapter, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because the next section explores the emergency gathering that allegedly changed the course of the investigation, the decision facing the future king, and the revelation that may finally explain the mystery that has haunted the kingdom from the very beginning. The emergency gathering that had been discussed in whispers for weeks finally took place behind closed doors, and according to fictional accounts circulating throughout the kingdom, the atmosphere inside the room was unlike anything many participants had experienced in years. By this stage, the investigation had expanded far beyond its original purpose. What began as a limited inquiry into a series of unusual developments had evolved into a far-reaching examination of influence, decision-making, institutional vulnerability, and the hidden forces that shape events long before those events become visible to the public. For the future king, the challenge was no longer discovering information. The challenge was deciding what that information meant. That distinction mattered enormously. Throughout the investigation, analysts had uncovered connections, identified patterns, questioned assumptions, and repeatedly revised their understanding of the situation. Yet facts alone do not determine outcomes. Facts require interpretation. Interpretation requires judgment, and judgment often becomes most difficult when every available option carries consequences. According to fictional palace observers, the meeting began with a detailed presentation summarizing months of investigative work. Charts, timelines, communications, and analytical reports reportedly filled the room. Participants listened carefully as investigators explained how isolated events gradually connected to one another, how institutional blind spots had emerged over time, and how seemingly unrelated decisions had combined to create challenges nobody fully understood until much later. Yet even after the presentation ended, one central question remained. What lesson should be learned from everything that had happened? That question sparked intense debate. Some participants reportedly argued that the investigation demonstrated the need for stronger oversight and greater transparency. Others believed the primary lesson involved communication and the dangers of assumptions. Several advisors suggested that the kingdom's institutions had become vulnerable precisely because people grew comfortable with familiar patterns and stopped questioning them. Each perspective contained elements of truth, and that made the final decision even more complicated. Meanwhile, outside palace walls, public speculation continued, reaching extraordinary levels. Citizens throughout the kingdom sensed that something significant was unfolding, even though most details remained confidential. Rumors multiplied, theories competed with one another, commentators attempted to predict outcomes. Yet according to fictional reports, none of those outside observers fully understood the complexity confronting the future king. Because the future king was not simply deciding how to conclude an investigation. The future king was deciding how to shape the future. Would the monarchy respond cautiously? Would the monarchy embrace reform? Would the monarchy attempt to preserve stability above all else? Or would the monarchy use the crisis as an opportunity to strengthen institutions for future generations? Those questions reportedly dominated private discussions. As the meeting progressed, another fascinating realization allegedly emerged. Investigators had spent months searching for a central villain, a hidden mastermind, or a single explanation capable of making sense of every discovery. Yet the deeper they looked, the more they realized that reality rarely functions so neatly. Sometimes systems create problems. Sometimes incentives create problems. Sometimes misunderstandings create problems. And sometimes multiple small decisions made by different people over long periods combine to produce consequences nobody intended. That realization transformed the investigation's final conclusions. Rather than focusing exclusively on individuals, attention shifted toward structures. Rather than searching for someone to blame, participants reportedly focused on understanding how future challenges could be prevented. According to fictional commentators, that shift represented the investigation's most important achievement. Because lasting solutions rarely emerge from outrage. Lasting solutions emerge from understanding. Yet just as consensus appeared within reach, another unexpected development reportedly captured attention. Several advisors allegedly warned that the greatest danger facing the kingdom was not the controversy that had already occurred. The greatest danger was complacency. History repeatedly demonstrates that institutions often learn lessons during crises and then gradually forget those lessons once stability returns. Could the monarchy avoid repeating that pattern? Could future leaders maintain vigilance after public attention faded? And could the kingdom emerge stronger precisely because it had confronted difficult questions? Those concerns reportedly shaped the final recommendations presented to the future king. In the end, according to fictional accounts, the future king reached a decision that surprised many observers. Rather than pursuing dramatic action designed to generate headlines, the future monarch allegedly prioritized long-term resilience. The goal was not simply resolving the current mystery. The goal was ensuring that future generations inherited stronger institutions, clearer processes, and greater confidence in the systems responsible for protecting the kingdom. That decision marked the end of the investigation. But perhaps it also marked the beginning of something else. Because throughout history, the most important moments are not always the loudest moments. Sometimes the moments that truly shape the future occur quietly, behind closed doors, when leaders choose between short-term advantage and long-term responsibility. And according to fictional palace observers, that may be exactly what happened here. So what do you think? Would you have focused on accountability, reform, stability, or transparency? Do you believe institutions become stronger when they confront difficult truths, or do you believe stability should remain the highest priority during uncertain times? And perhaps most importantly, what qualities should define a future king facing challenges that previous generations could never have anticipated? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because these questions continue generating fascinating debate among followers of the monarchy. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss future royal dramas, palace mysteries, leadership stories, and historical explorations. And speaking of mysteries, the next story may be even more intriguing. In our next video, a newly published book reportedly sends shockwaves through royal circles, prompting the monarch to confront questions that many believed had already been settled. What was revealed, who was affected, and why did the publication generate such intense discussion throughout the kingdom? Join us in the next chapter as we explore King Charles takes action after a bombshell book sparks new questions inside the monarchy.